Hi, this is Module 9, a recording of a meeting where I'm the only participant. I received some questions that I would like to answer. This will be a short video, probably about 15-20 minutes long, and answering the questions I received, assuming that the holiday in the United States had some effect on availability of people. So I want to start by making a quick announcement. The neuroscience and couples therapy, what every couples therapist needs to know about neuroscience audio, has a mistake in the beginning. It says this is a two-part audio. Part one is about what I just said, and part two is about self-regulation and regulation of other, but self and other regulation, including regulation of the couples therapist, is on lesson 10. So I'm going to try to make an adjustment to that. But all the interventions are in lesson 10. If you haven't listened to the neuroscience and couples therapy recording, I would highly recommend that you do. I think you're gonna enjoy it and learn a lot, take a lot out of it. So let me get to the questions about the session. One of the questions was, when the client, the male client in the first session says that he's been hurt by her comments, the comment, you lost me a job. Why didn't I go down the road of exploring his feelings? And how did I decide not to do that? And so I wanted to make I want to answer that. It's a really good question, and I wanted to answer it by saying that the first thing I want to say is going down that road of exploring his hurt feelings is not a bad thing to do. So at any time in a session, we have a decision to make about which way to go, and that could have been a decision I could have made, but I didn't make that decision because in my mind, two things I want to say. One is that this is one of the differences between individual therapy and couples therapy. We, in couples therapy, would do work on interpersonal issues as well as intrapsychic issues. So I could have decided to go more on the intrapsychic, but I decided to go more into the interpersonal, meaning, so what did you do when you felt hurt? How did you react? And that's what I'm more interested in doing in the first stage of the couples therapy process, which this one is. So by the time I saw them in the session that you heard, I had seen them, I believe, twice together, and then I had one or two individual sessions with each of them, and then the session that you heard is one following the individual sessions, as I mentioned in the intro to the audio. So in my mind, I want to talk about the interpersonal in the beginning, especially because they came in talking about a fight they had. And so I wanted to do that. And that's one of the differences between, in my mind, between individual therapy and couples therapy, that especially in the beginning, I put a lot more emphasis on the interpersonal. So I also wanted to tell you something else. So I was saying that this is, okay, so I want to get to a second question. So this is my answer to the question about why I didn't go the route to talk more about his hurt. Another question that came in was, when I asked him, was there anything he could have done differently? What would I have done? Actually, if he had said no, also, when I asked him, do you want to change? What would I have done if he had said no? Again, this is another very, very good question. And as I said, this was a session that happened after individual sessions. And so therefore, I knew that he would say yes to that question because I had already probed that in my individual session with him. And so I sometimes say, I don't ask a question that I don't know the answer to. And so I knew that if I asked him, do you want to change that, that he would have said yes. Because I know already that he wants to. If he had said no, I wouldn't have asked that question. I would have talked about his motivation for treatment. I would have talked about his ambivalence for treatment. I would have talked about him, wanting her to change first. I mean, I would have done things differently, but this was a way for me to move forward the conversation in order to figure out and help him figure out what ended up happening, which was the formula. I called it the formula. You got it. I need to listen better. I need to stop being, I think he said something like lecturer, because either he identified that he lectures when he gets anxious, or she identified it. I can't remember which one of them used that term, but he agreed with that term and wanted to change that. So that's what ended up happening, that I moved the, asking him, what could you have done differently? And is this something you want to change? Which was one question that came after the other, was a way for me to move forward the conversation about what actual behavior change he would need to do. What would he need to do differently when he feels hurt? So, later on, in the second phase of the treatment, we would talk about the origins of his feelings of hurt. We would talk about going a little deeper on his feelings of hurt. We would go a little deeper on the his survival strategies if we did more work around his vulnerability and how the vulnerability cycle operates between them. But right now, in the first phase of the treatment, I want to use a more solution-focused approach, which is, what do you want to do in the future? What kind of partner do you want to be? What kind of response do you want to have? And this is the other thing I wanted to go to, which one person also asked me, why am I doing so much of this slowing down in the beginning, that I don't want to get into the meat of what happened, of the fight, and why is it that I slow it down so much? And so I wanted to say something about that, and that's probably the last thing I'm going to say. So what I do, it's easy, as so many people tell me, it's easy to get sucked into the content and forget about the process. And so in the very beginning of treatment, I use more of a solution, future-oriented approach. It's the first stage. It's very slow. I ask questions like, what is it that you didn't do? I ask exception questions. Was the fight as bad or as long? I ask, questions, like I said, about what do you do in response to her not listening, and then I give him I praised him. I actually praised him. And so it is more of a future-oriented approach. It's the first stage. I'm very slow. I also want to be somewhat collaborative. So I gave him an option do you want to tell me what happened, or do you want to go with what could have done differently? I think that's one of the questions. So it's a question intended to slow things down, to give him some choice in the agenda for the day. And I think that's about all I want to say about this in terms of the question about why I don't go straight into the content of the fight. Let me see if there's something else I want to tell you. Yes, I wanted to tell you that I could, so if you heard the end of the first session, she, you know, I talked a lot about the difference between influence and control. And I want to say that she's the one who used the word control in a prior individual session with her. So she's the one who identified that she can become controlling. And that's one of the reasons I use the word. I try my best to not label the behavior that people have, but have the people label the behavior themselves. So she could have said bossy, she could have said, you know, when I get anxious, she could have said a number of things, but she used the word controlling. Actually, I think she said something like, I can get controlling like my father. But I should have. So one thing you don't hear me do here that I have done in subsequent sessions, but I could have done that here too. And I wanted to mention that you don't hear me acknowledging her frustration about his lack of board certification. And she says it's been, you know, years and I haven't, you know, he hasn't done it, and he says he's going to do it and then he doesn't. So I you know, this is an overdoing, underdoing dynamic. One could call it, you know, an over-functioning, under-functioning dynamic. So she tends to over-function. He tends to be more passive, say he's going to do something and not follow through, which was the theme of a part of our treatment process. And so I could have acknowledged, and I can't remember if I did that in a prior individual session, and I know I did that later, but in this session, if you just hear this session, it is a piece that's lacking in the session, that my acknowledgement of her frustration before I go on to talk about the difference between influence and control. Because she does believe it's his fault, and I could have expanded on that a little more and acknowledged her frustration. And that would serve as a dual purpose. One purpose, that acknowledgement and empathy for her would have served to strengthen my therapeutic alliance with her in the beginning of treatment, which I must have felt that it was strong enough, and that's why I didn't do it. And decided on the confrontation that day. And the other thing it would have done, it would have made him hear the impact on her of his lack of finishing the certification, the board certification. So when I do that, the empathic acknowledgement of the frustration, and I have the partner expand on it, like I said, it has a dual purpose of helping a partner feel understood and seen and heard, which I didn't do in this session, but also it has the second benefit of having the other partner understand fully the impact, in this case, of his behavior on her. So when it comes to, again, therapeutic alliance, I do recognize that my confrontation was strong or stronger than the session may have warranted if you didn't know that I felt that I had a very strong alliance with her, even though we had started not too long before this treatment, which is what allowed me to say to her, what did you do with that information regarding the fact that he didn't have board certification and you wanted to will it so. So she actually reacted very well to this confrontation, and it is a testament to the strength of the therapeutic alliance. So when you do this kind of confrontation, you do have to have a strong therapeutic alliance that will have the client withstand that. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop the recording and send this out a little later today. Thank you. See you next month.